Welcome to the City of Bakersfield Planning Commission meeting. This television broadcast is made available through cooperation with the local cable companies, the County of Kern, and the City of Bakersfield. The Planning Commission meets on the first and third Thursdays of each month. You can watch the rebroadcast of this meeting Saturday at 7 p.m. and Sunday at 10 a.m. The planning meeting agenda is posted on the city's website at www.bakersfieldcity.us. Presiding over today's meeting, Chair Larry Coman.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to call to order the May 20th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Coman,
Here.
Commissioner Lomas,
Here.
Commissioner Bajratash,
Here.
Commissioner Biddle,
Here.
Commissioner Bowers, Commissioner Cater,
Here.
Commissioner Wade.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. On March 4th, 2020, Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency in California due to the threat of COVID-19. The governor also passed several executive orders related to social distancing, shelter-at-home practices, and included the suspension of some components of the Brown Act related to public meetings like this one. There are no commissioners participating from remotely today. Based on the guidance from the California Governor's Office, the Department of Public Health, as well as the County Health Officer, the City of Bakersfield has limited this meeting to the general public. As such, only those interested in making a comment during consent and non-consent public hearing items will be allowed to do so. The public may stream a live view of this meeting by going to the website listed on the agenda or by watching it on your local government channel. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready to pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Public statements.
As previously stated, the recent COVID-19 surge and the governor's executive orders have waived certain provisions of the Brown Act requiring physical presence. Public comments have been encouraged to be made by email and phone call to the Development Services Department Planning Division. Those received in such manner have been provided to the commissioners and will be made part of the official record of tonight's meeting. As such, there will not be any in-person public statements tonight. Next item, please.
Consent items.
All matters listed under the consent items do not require a public hearing and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of said items unless a staff or commissioner request specific items be discussed and or removed for separate action. May I have a motion approving the consent items?
I'll make a motion.
That's Commissioner Cater.
I'll second that.
And seconded by Commissioner Wade. Madam Clerk, please conduct are we doing a roll call vote? Or are we doing the computer thing?
You can try using the computer first.
Oh, let's try using the computer thing, Madam Clerk. Oh, here we go.
Motion approved with Commissioner Bowers absent.
Chair Coleman?
I was a little slow confirming it. I apologize. I confirmed after she already cleared it, so.
Okay.
It was operator error on my part. All right, Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Consent public hearings. There was a memo provided to your commission for items 5A, transmitting public comments, and a memo for items 5B with a recommendation to refer this project back to staff for consideration at a later date.
Thank you. Now is the time for consent public hearing items. If an item is not removed by a commissioner, staff, or a member of the public, the commission will vote on all items in one motion without further comment. If an item is removed, it will be placed at the end of the non-consent public hearing items. At this time, I will open all of the consent public hearing items. Does any member of the public wish to remove a consent public hearing item? Seeing none, does any commissioner or staff wish to remove a consent public hearing item? At this time, the consent public hearing items not removed are now closed. Before I ask for a motion, the item 5B is being returned to staff, not approved, correct?
That is correct,
Okay.
Chairwoman. So you're only voting for 5A.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, so may I get a motion to adopt staff's recommendation on the consent public hearing item, not removed, incorporating all staff memoranda and revised staff recommendations?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Wade
I'll second it.
and Commissioner Biddle. Thank you. Did I get that right, Biddle? Yes, okay, sorry. Madam Clerk, please conduct a vote. Thank you.
Motion approved with Commissioner Bowers absent.
Thank you. Next item, please.
There are no non-consent public hearing items, so we will move to item 7, workshops.
Thank you. Director Johnson, do you have a presentation for the workshop?
Actually, we have two legal professionals who will be speaking on the topic of vesting tentative maps. And if I could get the clerk to put up the other presentation. Providing the initial presentation is Deputy City Attorney Vitti, who always sits to my right to keep me honest. She's originally from Arvin, has a criminal justice background, and obtained her law degree from Loyola Law School before practicing immigration law in the Los Angeles area. Since joining the city in 2015, she has become the primary attorney for the police department, city clerk, building department, planning, and subdivisions. Also in the audience and joining us tonight is Mike Hogan. Mr. Hogan is a graduate of Boston College Law School and has been practicing law in California for over 40 years. For the past 25 years, he has limited his practice to representing public agencies only and currently represents 9 cities, counties, and special districts in Central and Southern California. Mike specializes in CEQA and land use matters, assisting public agencies in the preparation of environmental documents and defending their compliance with CEQA and other regulatory programs. Mike is not a stranger to some of you since he has been defending the city of Bakersfield on CEQA lawsuits since 2004.
Good evening, commissioners. This is my item. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing with you the rights of vested tentative maps. As an introduction, this item was requested by Chair Coleman a few months ago. And so today, I'm going to be discussing with you the rights of vested tentative maps, exceptions to the law, as well as case law that exemplifies both the law and the exceptions. The vested rights doctrine is governed by the Subdivision Map Act, specifically Government Code Section 66498.1, which states that when a local agency approves or conditionally approves a vested tentative map, or a VTM, that approval shall confer a vested right to proceed with development in substantial compliance to the ordinances policies and standards in effect at that time. So essentially what the doctrine does is that it freezes in place the rules and the regulations that will apply to that map once it's developed. The doctrine also defines development broadly, and it encompasses grading, site development, construction of buildings, and uses. A VTM offers a valuable benefit to a developer because it locks in the laws and the fees that will apply once that map is developed. In looking at the legislative intent behind the VTM law, the government code states the following. Establish a procedure for approval of certain statutorily vested rights to a subdivider. Subdivider should be able to rely on the VTM before expending resources and liabilities without the risk of the project being frustrated by a subsequent local action. And the government code does ensure that a local agency has discretion of imposing subsequent conditions of approval, so long as the discretion doesn't preclude the subdivider from moving forward with the development. So if you look at the intent overall, it really does provide, the intent was to provide certainty to the subdivider, that once that VTM was deemed complete, they'd be able to move forward with their project. At the same time, local agencies do have discretion in imposing subsequent conditions, but it all ties back to the goal, the ultimate goal being that we want to allow the subdivider to develop. Now, I explained at the beginning of my presentation that there's a law and then there's exceptions. And these are the exceptions to the VTM law. A local agency may condition or deny a permit, approval, extension, or entitlement if it determines any of the following. Failure to do so would place residents in a condition that is dangerous to their health or safety or both. Number two, the condition or denial is required in order to comply with federal or state law. Now, the first couple of cases that I'm going to cover exemplify the general rule that once the VTM is deemed complete, the rules and regulations that existed at that moment in time is what will apply. The first case is Bright Development versus City of Tracy. In this case, the city had adopted a resolution to clarify and memorialize their policy on undergrounding utilities after the developer's VTM had been deemed complete. The court held that the city could not require the developer to underground offsite utilities as a condition of approval. In this situation, the city actually amended their standards 19 months after the VTM had been deemed complete. And now the city was requiring the developer to underground offsite utilities in their proposed subdivision and to pay for that cost. And the court held that the city could not do that because that policy wasn't in place at the time that the VTM was deemed complete, or it wasn't expressly required when the map was deemed complete. In Kaufman versus Broad Central Valley versus Kaufman and Broad Central Valley versus City of Modesto, city could not charge development fees in excess of those in effect at the time that the map vested. And in this situation, the city at the time was examining funding for their capital improvement funds, and they had an internal memo going on within staff. They were discussing how it was underfunded and they needed to increase the fees. At the same time, the developer submitted their application for the VTM, and the developer was not aware that this internal memo was happening, and the public wasn't aware that this internal memo was occurring or was being transpired. And so the VTM was deemed complete in June of '88, and 2 months later, the city implemented a policy increasing the fees. And just to give you an idea of what that policy did, the developer's fees when the map vested would have been $1,400 per unit. With the new policy, he would be paying about $4,800 per unit. So the fee tripled with that new policy. And the court held that the city could not impose that new policy because, again, it didn't exist at the time that the map vested. I mentioned to you in the beginning that there are exceptions. and the following cases exemplify those exceptions. In Charles Pratt Construction versus California Coastal Commission, while the developer had a VTM, there were additional state requirements imposed by the California Coastal Commission that needed to be satisfied before he moved forward. In this situation, the land at issue was actually a coastal community, and so the developer was required to also obtain a coastal development permit under the California Coastal Act. So while the developer tried to argue that the VTM was enough, the court held that there were additional requirements by the state that needed to be complied with because of the type of land that they were dealing with. So the developer was required to obtain that permit. For First Street owner versus Tustin Unified School District, developers' VTM required payment of school impact fee prior to obtaining building permits. In this situation, the district miscalculated the fee when they authorized the VTM. And so the standards required that a larger square footage be included in the fee. And so the developer was trying to rely on the city's mistake, basically saying that they wouldn't be required to pay the full fee. But the court said that they could not rely on that, and that they had to pay the full fee, because while you have the VTM and it gives you certain vested rights, you still have to comply by state law. So just to summarize, I covered case law dealing with the general rule, and I covered case law involving one of the exceptions, federal and state requirements. I was unable to find any case law as it pertains to the health or safety exception. Likely, it's because we already have a very similar exception under the city's police powers that are given to us by the California Constitution. So if I were to make an educated guess here tonight, it would be that since the city's police powers are derived from the California Constitution, as long as a city is able to make a requisite finding of a health or safety issue, a city wouldn't be challenged, because it's an inherent power that we have obtained from the California Constitution. So just to explain why I don't have case law. I bring up PCD PUD zones because I know that this was an issue before. As you know, they're adopted by the council through ordinance. The purpose is to allow for innovative design and diversification in building structures, lot sizes, open spaces, enables approval of specific detailed plans. Taking my presentation into consideration, if you were to have a VTM presented to you that had a PCD or a PUD, you would have to, and you approved it. The PCD that existed at the time the map was deemed complete or vested is what would apply to that map, not a subsequent amended ordinance of the PCD. That's the general rule. Of course, we can look at the exceptions on a case-by-case basis if there were a health or a safety concern, or there was, maybe we made the changes to the ordinance because of a state requirement or a federal requirement. But the general rule would be that the PCD that existed at the moment that the map was deemed complete is what would apply to that development. So just to summarize, the VTMs lock in the rules when an application is deemed complete. No contrary future rule unless needed to prevent a dangerous situation of health or safety or both. And we could impose new conditions in order to comply with state or federal law. That concludes my presentation. I'm open to any questions.
Commissioner Cater.
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation.
Yes.
Thought it was very helpful and very informative. I guess my question would be for planning staff. So I think, remembering a few months back, the item that kind of brought this all to our attention was a commercial center that was zoned, or that had a vesting tentative map over it. Can you explain, to me, tentative tract maps as they relate to single-family development, or, the kind of land use of residential is a little more clear. Can you explain the process of vesting tentative maps as it applies to commercial properties?
Generally, vesting tentative tract maps are for residential single-family development, but you can have vesting tentative parcel maps, which are primarily for commercial land. So in this case, you recall the Old River in Panama site had a vesting parcel map. So when that was deemed complete, that
It did have a PCD overlay.
it did have a PCD overlay, but it was vested based on when that parcel map was deemed complete.
And in that situation, the PCD ordinance was amended a few months after the map was deemed complete. And so we had to apply what existed at that time.
Is that I think at the time we talked about how that is not something that occurs often in the city. Can you explain how?
There are approximately 5 locations in the city right now that have zoning with the PCD overlay or strictly PCD, planned commercial development. And then just for the new commissioners, if I may, the PCD overlay is a requirement that the development come to your commission for approval. And your commission has opportunity to ask for additional development standards, or you can relax some of the development standards at your discretion. So, and again, part of this is for the new commissioners. And so what Commissioner Cater is kind of referring to is there was a parcel map that was deemed complete on a certain date. The PCD standards, which changed and required commercial development to be developed at a higher standard. At that time, the applicant said, I want to develop the site with the previous standards, the lower standards for landscaping, excuse me, sidewalks and such. And so there was a little conflict between the commission on what they could ask for and what they could not ask for based on the vesting right. So to your point, there are 5 locations in the city, approximately 5 locations in the city where there is a PCD zone that is undeveloped with a parcel map that's approved. One of those locations, if I recall off the top of my head, is the Bakersfield Commons area. Obviously, I don't think you'll have anything to worry about that. They will develop that site to current standards, if not better. And a second site was the Old River in Panama. So there's 3 other sites, approximately 3 other sites in the city that have that could come to your commission at some point in time.
Thank you. And I guess the question still remains, because PCD and PUD is a process by which the plan is presented to the commission, the public's able to come provide comments, and there's a level of subjectivity to that meeting of what can be requested of the developer. Conditions can be added. I mean, I think it was in your slides, to encourage innovative design, creative solutions. And I just remember that meeting, it was a PCD overlay, but there was essentially no ability to enact the PCD aspect of a PCD overlay because everything was set because of a tract map, and those two seem at odds to me still.
And I think that the items that were at issue didn't really fit any of the exceptions, if I recall. I think when it was like meandering sidewalk as opposed to a straight sidewalk, or 15 trees instead of 10 trees. So we really couldn't make that finding that it was a health and safety issue.
Well, and I guess, but my understanding is the vesting tentative parcel map is not at the level of a PCD site plan presentation that we would see. So for me, it seems like we didn't see, like the tract map is like a tract map you would see with residents where parcel lines are drawn, very basic building information is provided. PCD presentations usually involve a level of detail like landscaping, like meandering sidewalks. And so to me, how that meeting was left was that a tentative tract parcel map negates the PCD from really being a PCD, because there's not really anything that we can dialogue about that we can actually change, because it's not explicitly listed in the vesting tentative parcel map, if that makes sense.
Perhaps, well,
And other commissioners that were on, that just, to me, that was the experience. And so I think it seems strange that if we have commercial properties that can do pretty much what they want because they've been vesting tentative parcel map approved, then why are we still overlaying a PCD when essentially it comes to our commission and we have no ability to say anything about the project except that you have a right to do this because you're not encroaching on public health or wellness. It just seems to me like the PCD and the definition that we've been presented tonight are still kind of in conflict to where I'm not sure how that plays out on, I mean, granted it's 5 parcels, and does that also infer that going forward, this isn't usually a thing that we'll encounter with commercial properties? Or is this something that can still be, an applicant can still go through this process?
The applicant can still come forward with a tentative parcel map, and if the zoning on the property at that time has a PCD overlay, maybe that's something your commission should consider, is whether or not to approve that vesting map. In the alternative, if there is a vesting map on site, and this is an example that just came across this week, they were vested under a tract map for single-family residential. They did a general plan amendment zone change to commercial with the PCD, and in this case, there was an actual condition with the zone change that said you will lose your vesting rights under the previous map. So that may be something that, staff is aware of now because of the item earlier this year, and that's something we can inform your commission of also as it comes forward.
So I've asked a lot of questions. I'm curious if any other commissioners have other questions. Because it's still a little bit unclear to me is how the PCD has any relevance in the world of a vesting tentative parcel map.
well, I mean, in our situation, it's an ordinance under our BMC. So the government code tells you that, the ordinances in place are what will apply. So when the map vested, if it vested with that PCD, then I don't see what other variable could.
I guess if I may, my
Sure.
understanding is it's vested before the PCD is actually presented to our commission. So it's not really vested with a PCD that's been brought to a public hearing and discussed with the public. It's a vesting map that then says, in the future, I will bring this to a commission. But this interpretation then says, when it comes to the commission, if a public member, says,
Yeah.
I live next door and I think they need more trees, or, this is going to be really noisy and loud, all that we can say as commissioners is, I'm sorry, it's a vesting tentative parcel map. We can't change it because it doesn't constitute it doesn't constitute a public hazard. Does that? So it seems like a process that's not really.
I understand what
They
you're
seem like
saying.
they're at conflict, because if it would make sense if the PCD had to be presented at the time
At
of
the
the
time of
map,
the map.
and we
right.
had the conversation, and then they had the right to do it. So those things being tied together, but to say it's forthcoming, but when it's forthcoming, you don't have to comply with any of the conversation because we've already approved it,
Right.
doesn't really make it a PCD, in my opinion. Which is not a legal opinion I don't have here. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking for clarity more than anything.
And I didn't find any case law that had a PCD PUD issue. I mean, it was very very generic, the type of law that exists. So, I mean, perhaps there's other ways that we can handle it so that we're not stuck in this situation again.
Because I guess the case law that you brought up, like utilities being required to be underground, like that is an expectation of development. That is not a commissioner, like Commissioner Coleman is not going to put on a project that they have to bury their PG&E lines. That is something that's known as a developer goes into a project.
Right.
And, I think all of these are very clear expectations of development. PCDs are kind of that subjective dialogue of a community benefit. And so I think there's a value independent of it, but it just, in the situation that we encountered with Old River in Panama, we had to have the dialogue, but we couldn't actually have the dialogue because we couldn't say, we had to come up with reasons why things that in our definition of a PCD couldn't be applied to the project unless we were saving lives or, stopping heinous acts, or, it was a weird conversation that seems not entirely resolved how the two interplay, or if they should, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can circle back and see what else we can find in terms of that PCD, PUD zone. There was nothing else that I could find for tonight's presentation.
Yeah, I'm curious of other commissioners' thoughts on the, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Lomas, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Paul, could we ask you guys to come up with something to keep us from having that problem again?
So yes, I mean, we are compelled to process projects as submitted. But again, we inform your commission within the staff report, which we can do is note that one of two things. Hey, this is a parcel map coming in on an undeveloped PCD property. Note that if you approve this parcel map, they'll be vested for the development standards at that time. Now, some developers may take advantage of that vesting right for development standards, and some may just want it for the monetary value of it. But yes, that's what we will try to do, is make sure that you're informed of as maybe Commissioner Cater says, a possible conflict.
Please.
I guess I'm wondering is why can't a PCD approval process be part of the conditions of a vesting tentative parcel map approval in a commercial zone? Knowing that they will have to go through this process, well, they will have to present a plan where that plan may be subjected to community input regarding scale, regarding amenities, regarding public benefits. Because I think if the PCD then became a condition of approval, I mean, I do agree. I think if we changed, like for example, on this parcel, we changed our commercial development standards after the vesting tentative parcel. So maybe those standards as requirements don't apply. But the process of a PCD where the public comes, we look at the site because it's deemed having community value, that's just a part of the approval of a vesting tentative parcel commercial map, because that it's in a zone that requires that. Because I think what the opportunity that's being presented and how I'm seeing the city's perception of this is if you go, you're a commercial property and you go through the vesting tentative parcel map process, you're kind of getting away from not having to comply with the PCD requirement, because you're saying, we're going to set all this agreement before we go to this public hearing. And then I have the ammo that if the public doesn't like something, well, I already have an approval. So it's great that you came out, but you can't do anything about it. You know, and so could we make PCDs a condition of approval for the vesting tentative parcel maps if they're trying to do it on a zone that is already deemed a PCD zone?
I can say historically, that's not been the direction of City Council. That may be a conversation you want to have with your ward representative.
Okay.
Commissioner Wade.
Are you talking about PCDing all commercial development?
No, not at all.
Okay.
What I'm saying
Make sure
is,
we're clear.
I'm saying is an applicant sees a commercial property that is zoned PCD or a C2 PCD overlay, which is a lot of the large projects. The process that was just laid out where the vesting tentative parcel sets the expectations of development previous to the PCD process happening, thus negating anything that could happen from the PCD process from being required, seems broken. And it seems like if an applicant is trying to get a vesting tentative parcel map on a property that is already deemed PCD, then an expectation is that a condition of approval should be going through that process. And I mean, and you could say city laws like enhanced landscape or retail, we can't say, well, this is required because this is part of the law, because it wasn't law at that time. But the open-endedness of community dialogue and discussing the benefit of the project shouldn't be foregone because, you know,
The
because,
map was incomplete.
yeah, because it just seems like an easy way to skirt through the PCD process is to just put a tentative map on your commercial development so that the public doesn't really have any say in the process.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know, sorry.
Any other commissioners have any questions or comments? I just want to follow up a little bit because I find myself in an odd position because you know, as a builder and developer, whatever, I really always, you know, you're trying to get those plans approved to lock in the laws currently. I get that. But in this case, those PCDs are designed to allow uh, negotiation, so to speak, you know, with setbacks and various things. But we're not seeing that PCD plan when they're getting their their parcel map. And so
Right.
basically you're asking us to approve a plan that we never saw. And I don't know, I don't see it in that what you presented, that those two are necessarily tied together. We're seemingly to tie them together, but that's not the way I read that, what you showed us.
Well, it's an ordinance, and the government code states that the ordinances that are in place at the time is what applies. So I don't see how else you could interpret a PCD PUD zone,
Both of them require this commission approval,
right?
but we're not seeing that plan at the time that
Right.
track map was approved.
Right.
And so I guess we'll probably go back to what Commissioner Holomas had asked, to ask you to try to find us some middle ground on this, because we will get asked to approve maps in the future. And having been, you know, had our fingers bit a little bit once, you know, we want to try to protect ourselves a little bit. Now, we don't want to, none of us are really talking about trying to restrict the developers from developing. We really do want them to develop. But the things that we were asking for, in my mind, were minor, and we just happened to have a particular applicant that was challenging us on that, and I get it from the developer standpoint. But you know, I think that Commissioner Cater said it the best. We're kind of frustrated because we were asked to approve a PCD plan and really had no input to it because they had already had this. So the question, Mr. Cater was like, well, why you bring it to me at all? So.
Yeah, I just don't think that the example of, well, we can just deny the tentative, because I don't think we as a board want to prohibit development in Bakersfield. I mean, I don't think we want to throw out vesting tentative maps, but I think the two need to be connected in real, authentic ways, and not basically making one ceremonial and one the development, you know. So then could the PCD plan be presented at the time of vesting tentative, but then you're asking the developer to put a lot up front on a project? So yeah, it just seems like it's, yeah.
Yeah, there's a,
And again, not being a commercial developer, but I think the reason there's only a handful of these that we see right now in the city of this size is, I believe most parcel maps for commercial development actually come after they know where the pads are going on site. And so usually you'll have seen what the commercial development is going to be before you even see what a parcel map is. And again, we're giving you an example. There are a handful still that could come under this scenario.
So then could the PCD process be a part of the vesting tentative process as a requirement of approval so that it happens at the same time?
Again, that has not been the vision of where City Council wanted to go. That is something that we could look at, but that's not how City Council has wanted to go in the past.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I just thank you for staff for making that presentation. We had a lot of questions about it when it came up. We appreciate council coming here, even though we didn't have to quiz you on anything, but we appreciate it. So thank you. Madam Clerk, next item.
Communications.
Director Johnson, do you have any communications?
Again, if you recall, this next meeting on June 3rd is our general plan amendment window. So we would appreciate participation, and we do have quite a few cases scheduled for that meeting.
You know how many we have?
8, and several of them are controversial.
All right. Yeah, that's right, yeah. All right, thank you. Any commissioner comments? Seeing none, next item, please. I kind of skipped over that on you, sorry. I'll just jump right to it. That's adjournment. Get out of here. Okay, adjournment. Yeah, we're adjourned, thank you.